Okay, are we all sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. I could just reiterate Ray's words. It is so lovely to see you all here today. It doesn't feel that long since was it Newcastle last year? I can't remember. It was, yeah. And it's lovely to have you all back here again. An awful lot has happened in this year. I think we really are riding a wave with tissue viability at the moment. We have got to grab that wave. Now, what I'm going to be talking about this morning is about what's happening as being commissioned by NHS England. But what I want to flag up is that we are talking with the other 4 countries. So if you work in Northern Ireland or Scotland or Wales, we are in conversation with those countries because there is no point in reinventing the wheel. So we want to work collaboratively. So just to let you know that chances are what's happening in England may end up being picked up by where you're working or vice versa, because that seems to be the way forward. I think one of the things that characterises the way I like to do things is that I just like everybody to be friends if possible. Yes, we might have animated debates, but do you know what? We can achieve so much more together than we can separately. So that's the way we like to work. So, I am under strict instructions from Ray not to overrun. I foolishly said I never do, so let's see if I can prove myself right, or it might be a very, very fast talk. What I'm going to give you this morning is an overview of what's happening with the National Wound Care Strategy, some information about how to get involved, but I'll also be signposting you to some of my colleagues who are presenting sessions within this programme. I can only, in the time I've got, I can only give you an overview, but if you want to learn more, go and speak to the people who are developing these sessions, which I will be making a note. I've scribbled in my programme when and where. And come and talk to me. I believe I'm being stuck on a chair at lunchtime. Is that right, Ray? I might get a chair if I behave well. I might get a sandwich if I'm very good. But, come and talk to me. The challenge with me is I do listen, and the challenge with me is my friends will say, stopping me talking. I know I'm looking at you, Nikki. I like meeting people. I like to know what you think. I want to know your views, preferably politely expressed, but I don't really mind if you're a bit fed up and need to let off. I'm quite good at that as well. But only way I will learn about what it is, what are the issues, is by coming to events like this and listening to what you have to tell me, so I can take that back and put it into the national agenda, and we can try and make things better. So please don't be shy. I've got Lucy, my first year PhD students here somewhere. I'm fairly approachable, aren't I? Yeah, okay. So please just come and talk to me, because I want to know what you're saying. Right, okay, I'll crack on. So that's me. Dr. Una Adderley. I'm actually a nurse, district nurse with PhD, quite unusual, but there's a growing number of us in the room, registered nurse and Queen's nurse, and I've been asked to say that, and if those of you who haven't discovered the Q&I and the community nurses, go and find out about it. It's really, really useful. That's just a plug for them. Right. I think most people in the room will be familiar with the guest publication, published back in 2016. Basically, what it suggests, it was a modelling piece of work, but back in 2012 to 2013, 2.2 million wounds were being managed by the NHS. Those of us who are on the ground know there's an awful lot out there, because that's what we spend our days doing, isn't it? It's a large piece of work. The costs are huge. You may know this, but 4.5 to 5.1 billion is roughly the cost of obesity. We know how much is in the news about obesity. I'm very proud this morning, there's a piece in the news about Leeds, where I work, saying that Leeds have actually managed to achieve a drop in childhood obesity, which is apparently really rare. But look at the attention that got. That was the Guardian headlines this morning. Does anybody talk about wound care, Guardian headlines? I don't think so. And yet this is as big a health problem as that. I'm not dismissing that problem, but saying this is another big one. There's also some interesting work done by Gray and al, which says that if we don't do something about this, it's likely to increase by more than 50%. And that's not just the expenditure, that's the amount of work coming at you as people who presumably care for wounds. We simply cannot afford to let this happen. It's reached a point we have to do something. And the graph on your right, yes, just shows that trajectory if we do nothing. We can't afford to do nothing. And that's been accepted by the politicians. So, NHS England have commissioned a National Wound Care Strategy programme, which they funded for, I believe it was 12 months, we've now got up to 18 months, and it's looking extremely likely it will be 3 to 5 years. But we need to develop a strategy to work out how we're going to improve care. The focus for this strategy is pressure ulcers, lower limb ulcers, and surgical wounds. And by lower limb, we mean basically any chronic ulcers below the knee, so that's foot and legs. The reason it's focusing on these 3 areas is because these are the biggest areas that are causing the biggest impact on our resources. It's not that we're not interested in other things. I have those of you who know me know, I've got a real fascination about fungating wounds. It's a really interesting topic. I don't think it gets enough attention. But if we can get this stuff improved, then we can start to tackle some of the others, because we'll have proved we can make changes. And the danger is we try and do too much at once. The important thing is we focus on something, we get it right, and we do it well. If we do that, we then can move on. We've still got to provide good care and the best care we can, but we've got to focus our efforts. How are we going to do this? We want to work with key partners to establish the underlying clinical and economic case. I'm a great advocate of evidence-based care, and when I say evidence, I don't mean everything has to be underpinned with randomised controlled trials, but frankly, the things that should be. And equally, we need to take note of things like qualitative research, all the evidence that's out there. But evidence is also patients' views, how we spend our money, health economics, all sorts of evidence. It's not just that narrow focus on certain types of research. We need to work out what it is we want to do, and we need to work out how we're going to do it. And I think that is the really, really difficult bit. And I've told this story a bit last week. I found myself chairing something in London a week or two ago, and we were talking about ABPI for, it was a session on leg ulcers, of course, because I was there, and we were talking, this American surgeon said, well, how come people aren't doing ABPI? Because this evidence has been out there for over 20 years. And I said, yes, you're right, I completely agree with you. Those of us in that inner circle know what we should be doing. The problem is trying to make sure it happens for everybody who should get it. And that's just one example of wound care, but that applies across. It's so hard, isn't it, to do the right thing sometimes. So we need to look at how we can make this better. We want excellence. I'm not going to bore you with vision statements. We have to have them. Basically, we've got to improve this. We have got to improve so every patient who approaches service gets good care in a timely manner in a way that is acceptable to them. I told you the story last year about my father-in-law with his leg ulcer. It's still not healed. Update, he doesn't mind me talking about him. Interestingly, though, I was out walking the other day with a couple of friends of mine who are accountants, nothing to do, good with numbers, nothing to do with healthcare. And she asked me for some more cards for the Legs Matter, because she has quite a few friends she's discovered with leg ulcers. Surprise, surprise. And then she said an interesting thing. She said, do you know what? She said, and she didn't know about my father-in-law. She said, but do you know what? They've all had cardiac surgery, and yet they've all developed leg ulcers about 6 months later. Now, that's not a scientific thing, but it's an interesting observation. And when I tested it out with a couple of my tissue viability friends, they said, oh, yeah, we're noticing that pattern as well. So and these are people who are just being seen in general practice, because it's not, even though they've had this wound which isn't healing, it's not being picked up. We cannot allow that to happen. We've got to be picking these things up earlier. I suspect the pool of patients is much bigger than we actually even realise, because so many patients are self-caring or not even presenting to people like us. So we've got to get better at this. Because if we sort those early ones out, we might not have some of the dreadful ones 5 years later who are suffering so much. So, principles. Fundamental approach we're taking is wound care should not be viewed as a separate clinical issue, but integrated into the care of the underlying comorbidities. Nearly everybody who has problems with healing has an underlying comorbidity that is why they've got this wound in the first place or why it's not healing. We've got to work more collaboratively with our partners to try and join up those, get away from this silo working. It's a long-term commitment, I've made that. We are having to find money all over the place, and the people I'm going to be talking about are so kind. They are volunteering on top of their day jobs. I cannot believe we've got about 80 to 100 people working actively on this programme, apart from the 500, and many of you will be signed up to the forums. Huge number of people are contributing in their own time. Thank you so much now to those people. But it's a long-term commitment. Things are looking encouraging, and I think whatever the funding situation, this is going to carry on. It can't stop, can it? We've got so far. We're not going to suddenly say, oh, right, it's not going to happen. Of course it's going to happen. We're just going to find a way to make it happen. I've alluded to this already. We have got to address those interdependencies between the different operational groups, but also the different service providers. We can't have this segregation between primary care, community care, acute care, vascular services. We have podiatry. We've got to join up better than we are, because it's not serving the patients well. We've got to do that better. But the key priority is improving patient care. That is absolutely fundamental to the vision. So up till September, though, I think we are looking at planning how we are going to do this. I'll tell you what we're doing at the moment in the mid. And then moving beyond that, we're going to be looking at implementation. Now, these timelines aren't rigid in that, obviously, if we've got stuff that's ready to roll with, we will be starting to implement sooner. Some of the programmes are already further on. I mean, for for example, the pressure ulcer program has been going for a while. Surgical, the leg ulcer stuff is fairly well along thanks to the work of the Legs Matter group. But we've also got surgical wounds, which are only just fairly recently forming. So things are at different stages. You'll probably be quite glad to hear that. So you won't, those of you who work as tissue viability nurses, not everything will be landing on you at the same time. It will be a stepped approach, because otherwise it would be just overwhelming. But that's what we're looking at. But implementation will be rolling out. I thought it might be useful. Sorry, this is probably quite small for those of you at the back. Oh, you've got screens further back, haven't you? I thought it might be useful for you to just have an overview of how this is being organised so that you can see where everything fits together. We've got a strategy board, and my apologies to my fellow trustees yesterday. I was in an extremely long board meeting yesterday in London, which is why I couldn't be at the trustee meeting. I'm really sorry. Chaired by Baroness Watkins. Baroness Watkins is an impressive lady because she's a nurse. And she's a mental health nurse, and she gets what we're doing. And the useful thing is she has that outside vision because it's not her clinical area, but she understands our world. And she is proving to be a very good chair and extremely supportive of us. Margaret Kitching, who has just been appointed as chief nurse for the northeast of England. Many of you will have worked, she was in the northwest. I think she's now covering northwest and northeast until they appoint a northwest. She's still working as a tissue viability nurse. She is fervent in her support for what we're trying to do, and it's she that has driven this through. We have got some people in very high influential places helping us, which is encouraging. Ruth May is involved in this, as you'll know. Ruth May, chief nurse for NHS England, NHS Improvement, what drove the Stop the Pressure campaign from the beginning, again, gets this issue. They are working so hard to help us. Mike Burrows is my boss, the HSN. He'll be speaking to Barbara. I'll come back to that in a minute. Julian Guest, the guy who was the lead author on the papers that got this conversation up and got note taken by the policymakers. Jo Gander, who's also speaking again. I'll tell you about her session in a while. Well, I won't tell you all of it, Jo, don't worry, you're giving your own session. But Jo in NHS Supply Chain, who's chairing, who's head of quality, I'll probably get your title wrong, head of quality, director of quality, NHS Supply Chain, business function. So we've got people there who are looking at the quality of what's available to us. Liz Fenton, Health Education England, Deputy Chief Nurse, I think, for Health Education England. Alison Beale, who's working with GIRF, Get It Right First Time. Which is a programme that's been primarily working in hospital but is now moving, been doing the SSI work, surgical site infection work, moving out into community. And then you've got the chairs of the operational work streams. How am I doing for time? I'm all right. Okay. So that's our board and the chairs of the group. Now, if you look down at the diagram on the left, you've got the circle. Those are our three clinical work streams. We've got the pressure ulcer work stream that is being led by Jenny Hall, who's been leading the Stop the Pressure work. We've got the lower limb work stream, which is being led by Leanne Atkin and Brenda King, who jointly, who again, names will be familiar to you. They've done a lot of work in this field. And surgical wounds is being led by Jackie Edwards, who's a nurse consultant from from Manchester. And she has recruited about 20 vascular surgical consultants and professors to work with her. I take my hat off to Jackie. She is doing well with that lot. And they are being so constructive and so helpful with what we're trying to achieve. There is, you'll be aware, a REN session going on simultaneously today. I've noticed there's some interesting sessions on topical negative pressure that I don't know if I can get to, but I'd like to, because that's the research and those are the people we will be working with to inform what we're doing as well. They're being incredibly supportive. Then, supporting these three clinical work streams, we've got 4 enabler work groups. Educational workforce is being led by those of us of a certain age. Chris Beasley, who was the chief nurse, is leading that group for us, and we've divided that into both education and workforce, and we're looking, and I'll go through the detail of what they're looking at, that's fairly self-evident. Research evidence being chaired by Professor Dame Nikki Cullen from Manchester, working closely with Jo Dunville, who's also here today speaking, and they lead the Cochrane Wounds group. So we've got good people in the room. Supply and distribution is being led by something. Now, we've just reconfigured that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. A head of medicines management, Stuart Lakin from Doncaster. I promise you it's not entirely a Yorkshire initiative, far from it. We are recruiting from around the country. But Stuart happens to be from Yorkshire, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. And then the data and information. This is so key. This is being led by Anne Jacqueline. Those of you who were here last year might remember Anne, who gave a very impassioned talk about the need for better data, because if we can't collect data reliably, we don't know what the situation is and we cannot improve. Now, Anne led the wounds care work for the Carter programme, which was, I think, what she was talking about last year. So Anne is leading this group. We are needing to look at how we can improve data collection and information, because at the moment, if I go back to the guest paper, that was an estimate, because we couldn't tell. Our data is simply not good enough. And I think I mentioned before, Peter Bowden told me that the only way at one point they worked out who might have a leg ulcer was, were they being prescribed bandages? Because mostly you don't use bandages for much else apart from lower limb, do you? I mean, occasionally you might put one on arm, but usually it's lower limb. Because the data was so poor, that was the only way they could try and work out who was doing what. We've got to do better than that. So that piece of work is vital. And then on the right, we've got the forums, who are the consultation ones. Who has signed up to one of the forums in this room? Can I just ask? Quite a few of you. I really hope by the end of today, all of those hands will be going up, because there is a forum there for all of you. And what we desperately need is more people on the patients and carers. Who in this room cares for patients with wounds? Right, could you please go and recruit as a patient to sign up? You must have somebody in your caseload, at least one person who's got an opinion on their care. And who can use a computer. Sorry, we're having to do it online because we're so short on money. Please, can you all go out and recruit somebody? Colette, is Colette in the room? It would make your day, wouldn't it, if you're trying so hard to recruit patients and carers. Please help us. We really want the patient voice, but it's not. I can't get it because I don't have patients I see anymore. You do. Please, please, please help us. We really want to hear from them. Right. How are we doing time-wise? Okay. So, the role of the 3 clinical work streams is we're looking at the evidence base to identify what relevant evidence is there that we can use to inform what we do. There won't be evidence for everything, we know that, we're not kidding ourselves, but let's at least start with what is known, that makes sense. And we're interested in the good quality stuff. We then want to make evidence-informed recommendations to develop, and we use these terms quite loosely. We cannot do what NICE do because we do not have the resource to do it, but we can still come up with some pretty good suggestions for how care ought to look. We can do that. And then we're also going to identify where are the gaps, where there's some really important questions, but actually there's no evidence there to help guide us. So that's what the clinical work streams are doing. And the enabler work streams is basically to support that work, so it's a collaboration between the two groups. What I should say, I didn't say, was each of these work streams is relatively small. We're generally talking a dozen people-ish. Some are a bit bigger, some are a bit smaller, but around that. In my experience, if you make a group very, very big, very little gets done. The bigger the group, the less gets done, in my experience. So we've made these groups deliberately quite tight so that we've got people feeling responsible for what they're doing. But this is not an exclusive club, which is why we've got the forums, because we really, really want your input on stuff. I like the word stuff. I have a file in my folder called stuff, which everything which I don't quite know where else to put it goes into stuff. Okay, and the responsibilities of the Stakeholder Council is to oversee what the recommendations are coming out from the work streams. Now, we've sent out a consultation. I believe we have, I was told yesterday, we have over 500 people on these 3 different forums. We've got one for suppliers, the supplier forum, obviously clue in the title, hair and care professionals forum, and that is very broad. We've got people who are face-to-face clinicians, we've got people who are head of procurement, clinical procurement, working in an NHS organisation, people from care homes, researchers, anybody who is doing something that is clinically focused, we would suggest you select that. And then we've got the patient and carer forum. Now, everything, and we are not waiting till we get what we think is the perfect answer before we send stuff out. So, for example, a few weeks ago, we sent out a consultation on education. Did anybody in the room, did anybody get that one on education? Marvellous, good, I've got a few hands, great. And people wrote back to us. We had about 240 responses, which is brilliant. We had 200 from clinicians telling us their views on education. We had 30 plus from industry telling us what their offer is and how they would like to work with us. And we had 2 from patients, but I'd really like some more. So, but all that data is so useful. And basically that was the first step in trying to work out what's being offered at the moment, how people doing, providing education, and to give us a handle on what's happening now so that we can then start to suggest where we're going forward with stuff. One is tempt your palate, wet your whistle, is we are about to send one out on the lower limb. We have a draft pathway that is coming out, and if you want to, I'm hoping it'll be out by the end of the week, but if you want to get a quick look at it early, Leanne will be, I believe, presenting it tomorrow at 11 o'clock. It will be part of her presentation on her session on the lower limb. So if you've got an interest in that and want to have a look, get along and see what's being proposed. Please, everything that we're sending out is draft and is for consultation. We are not saying this is what we are doing. They're saying this is what we think needs to happen. What do you think? We want that two-way conversation. So please, the only way we will get things done in the way you think they should be done is by asking you. And it is visionary. We are sending you a vision of what we think is achievable. So please don't look at these things and say, well, we can't do that. No, we know you can't do that yet, because otherwise I wouldn't be here today saying we need to change how we work. We know you can't. But is this going the direction you think is a good idea? That's what we would need to hear from you. Right, I'm going to whip through very quickly the progress that's been made by the different work streams. I'm not going into detail because a lot of these people are presenting today and will be presenting in the next 2 days and go into more detail. I just want to give you an overview to get a handle on things. Stop the Pressure work stream has recruited their membership, which is basically bringing together the React to Red and the existing Stop the Pressure workshop. Some of you will be aware that there's a pressure ulcer core curriculum out there. If you're not aware, do go and have a look. It's enormously helpful for those of us involved in education. There's obviously a lot of work that Stop the Pressure's done, but what we're trying to do now is get that into action. And one of the things that is also starting to emerge is there's been a lot of work on preventing pressure ulcers, but how do we help people heal? You've got extensive pressure damage. Maybe we need to also be looking at that. So that's a conversation that's going on with them. But Jenny will be able to tell you more about that in her presentation, which I think is today at 3:30, I think, but you can check your programmes. But she's certainly presenting on that. And again, collaborating, her plans, priorities, collaborate with the education work stream to develop some draft recommendations for education, and with the data and information work stream to identify how we can improve our data collection. So there's the priorities there. Lower limb work stream I've already alluded to. Leanne is talking on Thursday at 11 o'clock in the lower limb, one of the lower limb sessions. They've recruited the membership. They've agreed the focus. Consultation is very imminent. And again, conversations are ongoing with the data and information work stream about what we can do about data. And we're also talking with the education work stream to see what could be provided to make life easier for everybody with education. I'll go into that in a bit more. Surgical wounds, Heidi, I don't know if Heidi's in the room. Yes, Heidi at the back. Heidi, I don't think you're presenting, are you, at this conference? No, but she's in the room, so you can go and collar her if you've got an opinion on surgical wounds. She's sitting in the back. Stand up, Heidi, so people know who you are. If you've got something on surgical wounds, please go and talk to Heidi. Thanks, sorry to dump that one on you, but don't like to miss an opportunity. Again, we're starting to work out some draft guidance. There is some guidance around there, but actually what the group have decided is they're going to focus on wounds that are open, either because they were intentionally left open or because they've dehisced, because those are the ones that cause problems. So it makes sense to focus on that. That's the focus of their work. Working closely with GERFT on the SSI audit. Again, these things are at a fairly initial stage, but if you want to find out more, you've got the right person in the room to go into it, and by all means, come and have a longer chat with me. Lots and lots of work going on there. The research work stream have been wonderful. Initially, they were horrified at our ask because we basically said, well, we need to know the evidence on everything. Nikki Cullum looked at me in absolute horror as though, you are mad. I thought, have I really had the nerve to ask for that? But bless them, she and Jane Nixon, who is chairing REN, have got together and they have made us a list of every Cochrane review that is relevant to the work we're doing and a précis of the results and the link to get us there, and every NIHR-funded trial that we are aware of that, again, is relevant. Now, we know that is not everything, but fundamentally that gives us a good handle on research in wound care at this point in time. We know there are, and we're not saying we're only going to base our recommendations on that, but that is our starting point, because we know those pieces of work should be good quality. So that's what we're starting with. And that is being shared with the work streams, and we will be basing everything we do on that, plus whatever else comes our way along the way that is judged to be good quality. And they are continuing to work closely with us in a very supportive way. The data and information workstream, this is complicated. You probably know this. We all collect data in different ways, we all code it differently, and we're all unreliable how we do it. Is that in a nutshell? Yeah, so it's useless. We need to get better at this. Anne is looking at the art of the possible. I suspect next year we'll have her here explaining what they're doing, trying to come up with some recommendations. Quite a few of you will be getting offers or suggestions from industry as well about different ways of collecting data, which can complement to services. But what we need, and what industry needs and what we need, is some specifications for what a good data collection system should be capable of doing. And at the moment, we haven't got that. So that's what they're working on. We're also, in the short term, looking at what is already being collected that would at least tell us something. We've discovered there are 3 codes that might be useful. There is a code, I can't remember whether it's an EPAC code or what it is, or READ code for leg ulcer. There is one for pressure ulcers, and there's one for wound. Now, if only every leg ulcer could at least, for those of you who work in a system that uses those coding systems, if only at least every leg ulcer had that code attached to it, we might be able to start counting how many leg ulcers there are. And I know the pressure, I know we'd like to know grading and all that sort of stuff, but we can't do that yet, so we've got to be patient. And if we rush at this, we'll make a bodge of it. So it's better to be patient, but there are some things we could be doing better in the short term. So we're just trying to work out what those are. He hasn't started flashing me yet with these orange lights, so I'm okay so far. All right, it's going to come on in a minute, I'm twitching. Educational workstream. Now, we've got a vision here. What we have done is we've created a list of all the university courses that we are aware of, the modules that we're aware of that offer tissue viability education. Because wouldn't it be great if you could just go and see what's being offered? We can't vouch for the quality or anything like that, but they are universities. They should have been through a quality appraisal system. So that would be a useful thing to be able to access, wouldn't it? But we also know that not everybody wants to do a university module or can do one because of funding issues. So we've got this vision of creating a series of what we're calling bite-sized online modules that will be free to access for everyone wherever they work. Now, my vision for that is I've been a tissue viability nurse, I'm a university lecturer. I would love, and my ex-student may disagree with this, but I would love it if I could have sent my students or my colleagues away to do some online working, that they do the chalk and talk, and then they come back and spend an hour with me and we talk about how we apply that learning to practice, rather than me having to yet again explain the anatomy and things that are actually quite boring to teach, but we need to know. But also things about just the fundamental stuff, and then use the humans for how we actually apply it to clinical practice. So we would love to give you, and how many of you in the room are involved in education of some sort with wound care? Quite a lot, I thought there might be. Wouldn't it be great if there was something that you could actually send people to do the basic work, and then you can structure your application around it, relevant to whatever group of patients it is that you're talking about that day. That's our vision. We are talking to various people. We've discovered that Nottingham University have developed online resources. We're talking to them. We know some of the companies have some very good RCN accredited resources. We're talking to people to find out what's there and then to see how we can maybe work together to make this available to everybody, wherever you were. And that includes patients and carers. They need information as well. So that's a vision. This will not happen overnight. I do want to manage your expectations. But our job this year is not to say in September, here you are, it's all done, but say this is what needs to happen and this is the strategy for making it happen. That's our vision. Oh, I'm on umber. Right, it's okay. Supply and distribution. Let me point you towards Joe Gander will be talking tomorrow on Thursday in the late afternoon session. No, today? Tomorrow, 3 o'clock-ish, talking about the changes to how products are procured for the NHS. We know this is a contentious issue. I have to say, I'm really quite impressed with what's being proposed. There will be a transition period. Joe will talk about that in more detail tomorrow. But we're working with supply chain and other providers to work out how do we actually assess what is needed by us. Last thing I want to do is go back to a world of cotton wool and Gamgee. I'm old enough to remember those days. The hair dye works well, but not that well. We do not want to go back there. But at the same time, we need to be more sophisticated as customers and know what it is we're buying. I can be very sophisticated when it comes to choosing a hand cream, especially now I've discovered the Aldi Me Too range. I'm very good at analysing that data and getting a good buy. We need to be more savvy with what we're purchasing to put on our patients. There's good stuff out there. I don't want to lose the good stuff, but there's stuff we maybe need to be more sophisticated about understanding. Stakeholder council, I think I've already covered. I've talked about the consultations that are going out, and these will constantly flow. There is no compulsion to answer. You can respond to whichever ones you want, but we do read what you say, and we do take notes. So please have your say. I really think we can do this. I really, really think we can do this. I would not have taken on this job. People thought I was mad. Nikki Cullen looked at me. I can remember we went to have a coffee and she said, "You want to do what?" I said, I know, but I really think it can be done. And I do think it can be done. Can't do it by myself, but together, I really think we can do this. We just need to put some energy and involvement into it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Una. So we've got time for questions. Any questions for Una? There's a hand up over here.
Yeah, I think there's a microphone making its way. It's okay, to your other side.
I think everybody in the room would probably agree that education is key. But my problem is you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. How do we engage those people that really are not engaged? Yeah. And I will put my hands up and say, if you send me to a respiratory study day, I'm not really that interested because it's not my bag. No. So how do we engage those people where it's not their bag?
Right. I think you're right. It's interesting. In fact, one thing, as I looked down as I finished, I realised there's one thing I forgot to mention, so your question's beautifully timely. Education's important. I agree with you. I don't think it's actually... We've had education for years. It's made sod all difference. That's going to be filmed, isn't it? Never mind. So I'm with you on that. I'm an educationalist, and I agree. I think what we need is system change. And it's only by getting system change we will actually achieve what you're talking about. So actually, although I've mentioned education before, what I haven't mentioned, the strategy will be mainly addressing system change, of which education will be part, but only part. The one I was going to say, my line manager from the... I didn't know about the Academic Health Science Networks until I went to work for them. Again, that's going to be off film, but there we go. And they are a national organisation that is about implementation and getting things into practice. I am couched with them at the moment. Mike Burrows is talking tomorrow about implementation into practice. It goes back to what that surgeon I said at the beginning talked about. You're right, you're absolutely right. How many people in this room know what they need to do but can't make it happen? We've got to find out how we make it happen. Do have a look at what we're proposing. If you look at what we're proposing for the lower limb, that is very... I don't think education's actually mentioned in that, because the focus is very much on how do we reorganise our services so patients are seen by the right people at the right time. It's different. And I think you're absolutely spot on, so thank you. That was an excellent question. Thanks. Anybody else? Oh, you're letting me off very lightly. I'm saving them up for later. Yes, by all means, come and see me at lunchtime if there's anything else you'd like to take up with me. Thank you very much.
I have some questions.
Go on, Ray.
That's okay.
He never lets me off.
Okay. So what do you think the strategy would look like then in 5 years' time?
Okay. Well, will I be retired? Who knows? I might be in need of services. You never know, do you? 5 years' time, I really hope it's looking very, very different to what we see now. I mean, I can't give you the detailed thing. I would hope that we are... Patients with a wound are being seen at the right place, at the right time, which is a much shorter time than it is at the moment. 6 months is way too long before you get to be seen by somebody who needs to. My vision is people should be seen within days. I've had a health scare in the past, which was very scary. I was seen within 10 days with the diagnosis. Unfortunately, I was lucky. It was the diagnosis I wanted, or not a diagnosis. Why can't we do that for wound care? Because the irony is, the condition I was seen for was, apart from my stress and anxiety, wasn't actually costing the NHS anything, and yet they still managed to see me in 10 days. And yet, if you've got a patient with a wound, that is costing the NHS time and money because they're having to be seen. So why can we do it for one condition so fast and not for others? I don't get it. So those are the sort of things I think we need to be thinking about.
Okay.
I've just started, but I can go into much more detail, but I won't.
Okay. Another question for me then. So social care is increasingly important. So what are the implications then for social care in the medium to long term, as there's more of a shift from care in hospitals to care in nursing homes and in patients' own homes?
Yeah. Well, so I'm a community nurse by background, so this is absolutely key to my vision of things. I I think we can help patients do an awful lot more for themselves. A lot of patients would like to be doing more for themselves, and that has implications for where we look after them, support we give them, and all the rest of it. I'm talking tomorrow I had a wonderful trip to New Zealand and Australia last year, and I'm taking you around in my camper van tomorrow afternoon. I was fascinated. One of the things I'll be talking about, I was fascinated because it's such a big country and because things have to be done differently there. Sometimes there's a different culture. And I think a lot of that we can do. And people are polite. They don't like to say to the nurse, actually, I probably can manage this myself because it feels rude. But actually, yeah, there are some patients, frankly, you do need to be in there. Of course you do. But there's an awful lot of things we could be doing to help people help themselves. And I think that's where social care and support. There's also, bottom line, if people aren't eating properly, their house isn't warm and clean, and they can't get around, that will impact on the health. So there are social dimensions. But for this thing, we are focusing on the wound care because we have to, but that's not to say we don't think the social dimension's very important.
Okay. And then just a final question for me. So you mentioned that education and training is a big strand of the work that you're doing. And I wondered if you've taken into account the system change with the introduction of roles like nurse associates, physician's assistants, and how you think that fits into your strategy going forward.
We are looking at education for everybody. So, and it's not just nursing. We love medics. Wouldn't it be great if medics actually got some good quality education around wound care, because then they could work better with us. And actually, one of the conversations we're having is the baseline education is not so very different from an undergraduate nurse, a post-registration nurse, a junior medic, a junior podiatrist. We've got fairly similar educational needs. And actually, if we can start to use similar approaches, chances are we'll get a more joined-up approach. That's how we hope we will move forward.
Lovely. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation.
Thank you.